Here's a wrestling question. Steve, I've always wondered what it's like to be on the receiving end of what Gorilla Monsoon would call a reverse knife edge chop. For example, a flare chop. Are they as painful as they look and sound? Did you ever ask a guy to lighten up or refuse to take them? Boy, I'll tell you something about those chops. I was never a big chop guy. I threw a few chops back in my day because, for a time it seemed like they were the thing to do. And, Flair kind of had that, he was expert at that. And Ricky Steamboat, Steamboat's chops were easy. But back in the day when I was working with Flying Brian Pillman, man, he loved to chop. And Brian could chop your ass off. Holy smokes, that dude could chop hard. We were working a loop down there in Florida. I guess it might have been in Jacksonville one night. And I was kind of turning my body to try to save my chest from those chops. And Brian called my ass out on it after the match. He goes, Steve, he goes, if you don't want to take those chops, just tell me, because you're turning and they're not getting the effect they need. So we're just going to eliminate them if you don't want to take them. And I said, man, that's a pretty strong statement. But he was right. They weren't effective. They weren't making the same sound. And when he called me out on that, from then on, dude, I took them straight on. Just lay them in, I'll take them. And then, but I'll never forget Brian for calling me out for that. And I loved him for it. And it was what it was. And then, by the same token, I would chop his ass back. One time in USWA, we was in a battle royal in some town. I can't remember. USWA was a weekly territory. And the one and only Danny Davis. He was another guy who was instrumental in my psychology, who I didn't name a while ago in that earlier question. Danny Davis was very generous to me. Taught me a lot. One time, I'll never forget, we was in a battle royal, and I chopped Danny 3 times. Pow, pow, pow. I said, spin me around and chop me. Well, Danny spun me around, and he started chopping the shit out of me. God dang, I had blood dripping down my chest, and I left him a note. I said, F you and your chops. So when he came back from the match, he saw that note and looked over at me, and we both started laughing our ass off. But, yeah, man, them chops were a bitch. Flair, Flair had those big meaty hands. Flair's chops sounded great, but they didn't hurt as bad as most people's chops hurt. Now, back in the day, if you go back and watch this old match, I can't remember the tag match. I believe it was Dusty Rhodes and the Mans with the Hands of Stone, Ron Garvin, against Ric Flair and Arn Anderson. It was a television taping. And Flair and Garvin were chopping the shit out of each other. And I think both guys had drawn blood from each other. And Garvin did have the Hands of Stones. And both guys were bleeding, particularly Rick. And he rolled out of that cage one time on a powder. And, it was just flat out awesome. Garvin can chop the shit out of you. I never was big on the chops. Like I said, I've chopped my share of guys, but it wasn't my thing to do. But if you can find that match, and that's when Dusty just lights everybody up when he kisses Baby Doll and then kisses Man with the Hands of Stone. I've talked about that match in the past on the podcast. But anyway,